My name is James Parker. I'm 77 years old, and just 9 days ago, on February 8th, 2026, I died. I didn't just pass out or have a close call. My heart stopped beating while I was sitting in my favorite lawn chair in my garden, right under the American flag I've flown every day for 40 years. For 20 minutes, I was gone from this world. And in those 20 minutes, I stood in the presence of Jesus Christ and was shown the truth about Donald Trump, the year 2026, and the storm that is currently breaking over our nation. Now, before I tell you what I saw, I have to be honest about who I was. I've lived in North Texas my whole life. I worked hard. I loved my wife, Linda, and I went to church every Sunday because that's what a good man does. But if I'm being truthful, my religion was more of a habit than a heartbeat. I liked the hymns, I liked the community, and I liked the feeling of being on the right side. I treated my faith like a tradition I inherited, like an old family watch that looked good but didn't actually keep time. I knew the stories, but I didn't know the author. I was more worried about the price of gas and who was winning in Washington than I was about the state of my own soul. I thought I was a soldier for Christ, but I was really just a spectator in a pew. It was a Sunday afternoon, February 8th. The Texas winter had finally softened into a beautiful, clear day. I was out in the garden, just resting my eyes and enjoying the sound of the wind snapping against the flag. Linda was inside starting on some early dinner. Everything felt peaceful until it didn't. It felt like a giant hand reached into my chest and squeezed. I tried to call out for Linda, but my lungs wouldn't take in air. I looked up at the flag, then at the blue sky, and then the world simply folded into shadow. The transition from the world I knew to the world I didn't know wasn't like falling asleep. It was like waking up from a very long, very hazy dream. One moment I was gasping for air, staring at the stitching on that flag, and the next, the darkness just evaporated. I didn't feel the grass beneath my feet anymore, but I wasn't floating either. I was standing on something that felt firmer than any Texas limestone, but it glowed like it was made of liquid pearls. I looked at my hands. Now, you have to understand, at 77, my hands were a map of every hard day I'd ever worked. They were covered in scars from old tools, wrinkled with age, and stiff with the kind of ache that never really goes away. But as I stood there in that light, I saw the hands of a young man. They were strong, steady, and full of life. I touched my face and didn't feel the deep lines across my forehead. I stood up straight, and for the first time in 30 years, my lower back didn't give me a single bit of trouble. It was a strange thing, feeling so familiar yet so new. I felt like the real James Parker had finally stepped out of a heavy, rusted suit of armor. The air around me was thick with something I can only describe as living peace. In Texas, we know what a quiet morning feels like, but this was different. This was a silence that was alive. It didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting. There were colors moving in the distance that I don't have names for. They weren't just colors you see with your eyes, they were colors you feel in your chest. I saw shades of gold that hummed with music and blues that felt like the deepest breath of fresh air you've ever taken. I stood there, rooted to the spot, wondering if I had finally lost my mind, or if I had finally found it. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sudden change, but more like the way the room feels when someone you love walks in. The light began to gather in one place, becoming brighter but somehow more gentle at the same time. I turned around, and there he was. I didn't need anyone to tell me who it was. My soul knew him before my eyes even focused. It was Jesus. He wasn't standing far off. He was right there, as real as any person I'd ever sat next to in a church pew, but infinitely more present. He wasn't some distant king on a throne made of cold gold. He was a man, yet he was God. I could see the texture of his robe, the strength in his hands, and the way the light didn't just shine on him, it came out of him. But it was his eyes that broke me. When he looked at me, I felt like every wall I'd ever built around my heart just crumbled into dust. He saw everything. He saw the times I'd cheated on my taxes, the times I'd been short with Linda, the times I'd sat in church thinking about football instead of the gospel. He saw every hidden thought, every selfish motive, and every secret fear I'd ever tucked away. And in that moment of being completely seen, I expected to feel judgment. I expected him to look at me with the same disappointment I often felt for myself. But he didn't. He looked at me with a compassion so deep, it felt like it was pulling the very breath out of me. It was a love that didn't just tolerate me, it wanted me. It was the kind of love that makes you realize how much of your life you spent chasing things that don't matter. James, he said. His voice didn't just come through my ears, it resonated through my entire being. It was the sound of every good thing I'd ever known. It was like the voice of a father, a brother, and a savior, all rolled into one. When he spoke my name, it felt like the most important thing that had ever been said in the history of the universe. I couldn't help it. I just collapsed. I fell to my knees, burying my face in my hands, and I started to cry. These weren't the tears of a man in pain. They were the tears of a man who realized he had been starving his whole life and had finally been offered a feast. Lord, I whispered, my voice sounding young and clear, I'm so sorry. I spent 77 years talking about you, but I never really listened. I lived for myself. I used your name to make myself feel better, but I didn't let you change me. I was just a hollow man in a suit. I felt his hand on my shoulder. The warmth that traveled from his hand through my arm was like a liquid fire that didn't burn. It just healed. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He didn't argue with my assessment of my own life. He just let me speak the truth. Because in his presence, you can't be anything but honest. All the masks we wear in this world, the good neighbor mask, the faithful church member mask, the strongman mask, they all melt away. You are here now, James, he said, helping me to my feet. But you cannot stay. Not yet. I have things for you to see so that you can tell the others what is truly happening beneath the surface of your world. He stood there with me, and for a moment we just looked at each other. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in that light forever. I wanted to ask him about my parents, about the friends I'd lost, about all the mysteries of the Bible I never quite understood. But I could see in his expression that there was a weight to what he needed to show me. It wasn't a weight of sadness, but a weight of purpose. It was like he was a general preparing a soldier for a battle the soldier didn't even know was happening. The world is sleeping, James, he told me, and his voice carried a trace of a deep divine sorrow. My people have built their houses on sand, and they are surprised when the wind begins to blow. Scent, they are looking for safety in systems that are failing, and they are looking for truth in voices that are lying. I am going to show you the reality of the shaking that has already begun. He gestured with his hand, and the shimmering light of the realm we were in began to dissolve. It was like a movie screen being pulled back, revealing a much larger, much more complicated picture. Suddenly, we weren't in that place of pure peace anymore. We were standing high above the earth, looking down at the vast expanse of the United States. From that height, the country looked beautiful, a tapestry of lights, mountains, and rivers. But as I watched, Jesus moved his hand again, and it was like he was peeling back a layer of film from my eyes. Look deeper, he commanded, and that's when I saw the horror of it. It wasn't a physical horror of blood and guts, but a spiritual horror that was much worse. I saw a thick, gray fog that seemed to be clinging to the ground, rolling through the streets of every city and town. It looked like a heavy smog, but it wasn't made of smoke. It was made of something heavy and suffocating. And inside that fog, I saw the shadows. They were everywhere. They were dark, jagged things that didn't have a solid shape, but they were definitely alive. They moved with a purpose that was chilling. I saw them weaving through the crowds of people in the busy cities. I saw them sitting in the passenger seats of cars on the highways. I saw them standing on the roofs of houses. They weren't fighting the people. They were whispers. I could see the energy of their words as they leaned into the ears of men and women who were just trying to go about their day. I saw a man standing at a gas station looking at his phone. A shadow was draped over his shoulders like a heavy cloak, whispering something to him. I could see the man's face darken with a sudden, irrational anger. He didn't know why he was angry, but he was. I saw a woman in a quiet suburban kitchen, and a shadow was coiled at her feet, feeding her a sense of hopelessness that made her want to just give up on everything. They think the struggle is with their neighbor, Jesus said, and his voice echoed over the continent. They think the enemy is the person with the different sign in their yard, or the person who speaks a different language. They don't see the spirits that are driving them to hate. They have forgotten that the real war is not against flesh and blood. I watched as the shadows moved with more intensity towards certain places. It was like they were attracted to anger and fear the way a moth is attracted to a light. The more people argued, the more the shadows multiplied. The more people hated, the thicker the gray fog became. It was a cycle that seemed impossible to break. Then he turned my attention to the churches. My heart lifted for a second, thinking that surely the churches would be like bright lighthouses in the middle of this gray mess. But as we drifted over town after town, I saw that many of the steeples were just as dark as the buildings around them. Some of them even seemed to be magnets for the shadows. "Look inside," Jesus said. I saw into the sanctuaries. I saw people sitting in rows, dressed in their Sunday best. They looked just like I used to look. They were checking their watches, thinking about where they were going to eat lunch, or nursing a grudge against the person 3 rows back. I saw preachers standing behind pulpits, but their hearts weren't on fire. They were carefully choosing words that wouldn't offend anyone. They were talking about living your best life or being a good person, but they weren't talking about the cross. They weren't talking about repentance. The shadows were walking right through the church doors. I saw them standing in the aisles, whispering to the deacons, leaning over the shoulders of the worship leaders, and the people didn't even flinch. They were so used to the habit of religion that they couldn't recognize the presence of the enemy. They were comfortable. They felt safe because they were inside a building with a cross on top. But the Spirit of God was standing outside, knocking on the door, and no one was answering. "This is the great deception, James," Jesus told me, and his eyes were like burning lamps. "My people have traded the power of the Spirit for the comfort of the world. They want a God who fits their politics, not a God who demands their lives. They have turned my house into a theater, and they have turned my grace into a reason to stay exactly as they are." As the vision of the churches faded, the landscape beneath us began to swirl. The ground didn't move, but the spiritual atmosphere did. It felt like a storm was gathering, not in the clouds, but in the very soul of the country. Jesus led me through the air, and we seemed to descend toward a place that felt like the center of a great tension. It was a place where the noise of the world was the loudest, where the arguments and the shouting were thickest. In the middle of this swirling energy, I saw a figure. It was Donald Trump. He wasn't sitting in an office or standing behind a podium in this vision. He was standing alone in a field of tall grass that was being whipped by a fierce wind. Above him, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, and lightning flashed constantly, but there was no thunder. Instead of thunder, the air was filled with the sound of millions of human voices. Some were cheering his name with a fervor that felt like worship, and others were screaming in a rage that felt like it wanted to tear the world apart. I looked at him closely. In the vision, he looked weathered, like a man carrying a weight that no human was ever meant to carry. But he wasn't the source of the storm. He was the lightning rod for it. "What do you see, James?" Jesus asked. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos below us. "I see a man everyone is fighting over," I replied. "I see a man who has divided the whole country." "Look again," Jesus said. "Look with the eyes I am giving you now." I focused my sight, and suddenly the man himself seemed to become transparent, like a sheet of polished glass. I realized then that I wasn't just looking at a politician. I was looking at a mirror. As the crowds of people rushed toward him from both sides, I saw something startling. When the people who loved him looked at him, they didn't see a flawed man. They saw their own desires for power, for vengeance, or for a return to a time they missed. They had turned him into an image of their own hope, an idol made of flesh and blood. Then I looked at the people who hated him. When they looked at him, they didn't see a man either. They saw a monster that justified their own bitterness, their own pride, and their own sense of superiority. Their hatred for him had become their religion. It defined them. It gave them a reason to wake up in the morning. "He is a catalyst, James," Jesus explained. "He is not the savior, and he is not the enemy. He is the one I have allowed to stand in this moment to reveal what is hidden in the hearts of my people. He is the mirror that shows America its own face. The pride you see in him is a reflection of the pride in the nation. The division you see around him is the division that was already there, buried deep in the soil." As I watched, the scene shifted. I saw the year 2026 appear in the sky. Not in cold numbers, but in letters of fire that seemed to vibrate with a warning. Beneath those letters, the shaking began. I saw the map of America begin to ripple like water. It looked like an earthquake was happening, but it wasn't the ground that was breaking. It was the systems. I saw the great buildings of finance in New York begin to tremble. I saw the halls of government in Washington, D.C. start to crack as if the very foundations were made of sand. I saw people running to and fro, clutching their bank accounts, their titles, and their political identities, trying to hold them together as they crumbled. Everything that can be shaken will be shaken, Jesus said, and the authority in his voice made the vision tremble. 2026 is the year where the false foundations are exposed. My people have built their security on the strength of their economy, the power of their military, and the cleverness of their leaders. But I am pulling back the curtain. I am showing them that these things are ghosts. They are vapor. I saw a vision of a massive clock, its hands spinning wildly. Every time the hands passed a certain point, another shaking would occur. I saw a moment where the news media went completely silent, their screens turning to static, because the narratives they had spent years building were suddenly proven to be lies. I saw a moment where the leaders of the world sat in a room, staring at each other in total silence because they realized they had no control over the events unfolding. Then, the vision narrowed down to individual homes. I saw families sitting at dinner tables, but they weren't eating. They were staring at each other with a look of profound realization. I saw a father put down his phone, look at his children, and for the first time in years, he started to pray. Not a rehearsed prayer, but a cry for help. I saw a woman walk into her backyard, look at the sky, and realize that the things she had been worried about, her status, her house, her reputation, didn't matter anymore. This is the mercy in the shaking, Jesus told me. The world thinks it is a disaster, but I see it as a rescue. I am breaking the chains of their distractions. I am silencing the noise so they can finally hear my voice. Donald Trump, the politics, the elections, these are the tools I am using to bring the nation to its knees. Not to destroy it, but to save it from its own pride. I saw a golden thread beginning to weave its way through the chaos. Wherever the shaking was the most intense, this thread would appear. It was a light that didn't come from the sun. It came from people. I saw a young man in a city street helping an elderly woman he would have normally ignored. I saw a church that had been dark and cold suddenly burst into light as the people inside stopped arguing about the color of the carpet and started weeping for their neighbors. This golden light was a different kind of power. It didn't need a vote, it didn't need a budget, and it didn't need a leader in Washington. It was the power of the Spirit moving through ordinary people who had finally decided to take God seriously. The shaking will continue until only the things that are eternal remain, Jesus said. 2026 is the threshold. It is the door. On one side is the world as they have known it, a world of shadows and illusions. On the other side is the reality of my kingdom. Many will try to run back to the old ways, but the door is closing. They must choose to move forward into the light, or they will be swallowed by the shadows they have loved. I watched as the figure of Donald Trump appeared again. This time, standing on a high mountain, he was holding a torch, but the flame was flickering between a bright gold and a dull gray. "The man is a signpost," Jesus whispered. "His actions in 2026 will shock the world, not because of his strength, but because of his vulnerability. I will show the world that even the most powerful men are but dust in my hands. When the shaking reaches its peak, people will look to him for answers, but he will have none. In that moment, the nation will have to decide, will they continue to seek a king of the earth, or will they turn to the King of Kings?" The vision of the mountain and the man with the flickering torch didn't fade away so much as it expanded, drawing me to the very streets of the towns I'd known my whole life. Jesus led me through the air, and we descended until we were walking. Or rather, gliding just above the pavement of a typical American town square. It looked like any Saturday morning in Texas. People were carrying bags of groceries, kids were tugging on their mothers' hands, and old men were sitting on benches talking about the weather. But As I looked closer, the gray fog I'd seen from above was thick here, clinging to the ankles of every passerby like a heavy, invisible mud. I saw a group of men standing near a coffee shop. They were talking about the latest news, their faces red and their voices rising. Above them, 3 of those dark, jagged shadows were perched on the awning of the shop. They looked like oversized crows made of smoke, and every time one of the men said something particularly bitter or angry, the shadows would lean down and breathe a puff of that gray mist into the man's face. The man wouldn't see it, but he would suddenly lean in closer, his eyes narrowing, his words becoming sharper and more cruel. He thought he was just being passionate about his country, but I could see he was being fed a poison that was rotting his peace. They are being stirred up for a battle that doesn't belong to them, Jesus said, his voice vibrating with a sorrow that I felt in my own bones. They believe that if they yell loud enough, they can change the world. They don't realize that the noise they are making is only drowning out the one voice that can actually save them. In 2026, this noise will become a roar that will drive many to the edge of despair. He pointed toward a woman sitting alone on a park bench. She was staring at a screen in her hand, her thumb scrolling faster and faster. A shadow was coiled behind her, its long, thin fingers resting on her temples. I could see her heart rate through her chest. It was racing. She was filled with a frantic kind of dread, the kind that makes you feel like the world is ending in 5 minutes. She was reading about the shaking, about the elections, about the man on the mountain, and every word was like a brick being added to a wall around her spirit. She is a prisoner of a war she cannot see, Jesus told me. She thinks she is staying informed, but she is actually being hollowed out. I did not create the human heart to carry the weight of the whole world's troubles. I created it to carry my love. In the year 2026, many will find that their hearts simply cannot hold the tension anymore. They will break, James. And when they break, they will either fall into the shadows or they will finally look up and see me. We moved from the square to the front of a large, modern building. It was a place of business, a place where people managed the money and the information that kept the town running. But the foundations of the building looked like they were made of wet cardboard. I could see through the walls into the offices. People were scurrying around, looking at charts and numbers, trying to find a sense of security in things that were already dissolving. Look at their supports, Jesus said. I saw that instead of standing on solid ground, these people were leaning on thin, wooden props that were riddled with rot. They were leaning on their bank accounts, their social standings, and the promises of their political leaders. In 2026, Jesus continued, I am going to remove the props, not because I want them to fall, but because I want them to learn how to stand on the rock. The shaking will touch the things they find most precious. It will touch their wealth, it will touch their sense of certainty, and it will touch the very systems they trust to tell them what is true. When the news they trust is revealed to be a lie, and when the money they trust is revealed to be a ghost, what will they have left? I saw a vision of a great library where the books were being emptied of their ink. The pages were becoming white and blank. It represented the loss of truth in the culture. People were arguing over things that didn't exist, fighting for shadows, and building their lives on fables. The man on the mountain, Donald Trump, is the one who forces them to see the blank pages, Jesus explained. He is not the one who took the ink away, but his presence makes it impossible to pretend the ink is still there. He reveals the vacuum. He shows the people that their institutions are empty shells. This is why some love him with a blind passion. They think he can fill the emptiness. And this is why some hate him with a blind rage. They blame him for the emptiness that was already there. Both are looking at the man instead of the hole in their own souls. The vision shifted again, and we were inside a house. It was a simple home, much like mine. A family was gathered around a television, watching a broadcast of the man speaking. The father was nodding his head, his fists clenched in support. The mother was shaking her head, her face etched with a deep, dark worry. The children were looking back and forth, their eyes filled with a confusion that felt like a physical weight. The division has entered the sanctuary of the home, Jesus said. The enemy has used the political spirit to turn brother against brother and husband against wife. They have forgotten that they belong to a kingdom that is not of this world. In 2026, the shaking will force these families to decide what they love more, their opinions or their people. They will have to decide if they love their side of the argument more than they love the souls of those sitting across the table. I saw a dark spirit larger than the others standing in the corner of that living room. It was a spirit of mockery. It was laughing as the father and mother started to argue. It was feeding on the friction. This spirit tells them that they are right and everyone else is stupid, Jesus said. It tells them that their anger is a virtue. It is one of the strongest spirits in America today, James. It has even taken up residence in the pulpits of my churches. It tells my people that they can hate in my name, but I tell you, no one can truly know me and hold on to that kind of hate. He moved his hand, and the house vanished. We were back in that space of pure light for a moment, and I could feel the intensity of his gaze. The year 2026 is a sifting, James. Like wheat being tossed into the air, the wind of the Spirit will blow away the chaff. The man who is at the center of the storm is just a tool in the hand of the Almighty. I am using him to wake up the sleeping, to expose the hypocrites, and to give the faithful a chance to shine. Do not fear the shaking. The shaking is the only thing that can wake a person who is having a nightmare. I saw a vision of the American flag, the one from my garden. It was being whipped by a storm, its edges frayed and its colors faded. But as the wind blew harder, the old faded material began to tear away, revealing a new, brilliant banner underneath. It wasn't a political banner. It was a banner of light that had the names of God written all over it. The nation is being stripped of its old clothes, Jesus said. It is a painful process. It feels like a death, but I am the God of the resurrection. I am not interested in saving a political system. I am interested in saving a people. Tell them, James. Tell them that the man they are fighting over is just a man, but the God they are ignoring is the King of Glory. Tell them that 2026 is the year of the great choice. I felt a surge of hope, even in the midst of the scary things I was seeing, because I realized that Jesus wasn't worried. He wasn't surprised by the news or the polls or the anger. He was standing above it all, moved by love, working a plan that was much bigger than any election. He was looking for a people who would stop looking at the storm and start looking at the one who can walk on the water. There is a remnant, James, he said, and he smiled. That smile was like the sun coming out after a week of rain. There are those who are not bowing to the idols of politics. There are those who are praying in the secret places. There are those who are loving their enemies and feeding the poor. They are the ones who will lead the way through the shaking of 2026. They are the light of the world, and the darkness will not overcome them. Jesus took my hand again, and the ground beneath us seemed to turn into a sea of glass, reflecting everything that was happening in the hearts of men across the country. I looked down and saw the year 2026 once more, but this time it was surrounded by a circle of fire. It wasn't a fire that destroyed, it was a fire that tested. I saw people walking through this year like they were walking through a furnace. Some were coming out the other side glowing like pure gold, while others were crumbling into ash because they had nothing real inside of them to stand the heat. This is the sifting of the souls, James, Jesus said, his eyes watching the people with a depth of love that made my heart ache. In 2026, I am going to let the wind of the Spirit blow across every heart. The things that are light and hollow, the opinions, the political pride, the anger will be blown away like chaff. Only what is heavy with my presence will remain. I am doing this because I love them too much to let them keep chasing ghosts. He showed me a vision of a great harvest field, but instead of wheat and tares, I saw people who were literally glowing with different colors. There were those who glowed with that golden light of the Spirit, and then there were those who were covered in a dull, heavy gray. As the year 2026 progressed, the gap between the two groups grew wider and wider. There was no more gray area. You were either moving toward the light or being swallowed by the fog. I saw the man, Donald Trump, again, This time he was standing in a room filled with maps and screens, surrounded by people who were shouting advice at him. But he looked tired. He looked like a man who realized that all the power in the world couldn't stop the tide that was coming. I saw him sit down and put his head in his hands. In that moment, he wasn't the giant figure on the television. He was just a man, fragile and overwhelmed. In 2026, Jesus said, "I will allow a moment to come where this man's human weakness is laid bare for all to see. It will be a shock to those who have made him a god, and it will be a moment of testing for those who have made him a monster. I will show the nation that their hope cannot rest on the shoulders of one man, no matter how bold or strong he seems. The shaking will hit the highest offices and the lowest homes alike." I saw a vision of the American economy. It looked like a giant, intricate machine made of silver and gold, but it was held together by nothing but spider webs. People were worshiping the machine, feeding it their time, their families, and their peace. But in the year 2026, I saw a hand reach out and touch one of the main gears. The machine began to groan and slow down. People panicked. They started throwing everything they had into the machine to keep it turning. But it didn't matter. The webs were breaking. "They have made a god out of their prosperity," Jesus told me, and his voice was like a heavy weight. "They think their safety is in their numbers and their bank accounts, but I am the one who gives and the one who takes away." In 2026, the shaking of the money will be the thing that finally breaks the pride of many. They will realize that you cannot eat gold and you cannot find peace in a rising market. I am stripping away the false security so they can find the true security in me. We moved through the vision to a place where I saw young people. This part of the vision made me weep. I saw teenagers and young adults wandering through the gray fog looking for anything that felt real. They were being bombarded by voices from their screens, voices that told them they were nothing, voices that told them to be angry, voices that told them there was no hope. The shadows were thick around them, whispering lies about their identity and their future. But then, I saw a change. In the middle of the 2026 shaking, some of these young people began to stop listening to the noise. They began to drop their phones and look at the sky. I saw small groups of them gathering in parks, in homes, and in street corners. They weren't talking about politics. They were crying out for something they couldn't even name yet. They were crying out for the truth. "The harvest is ready, James," Jesus said, and I saw a spark of joy in his eyes. The enemy thinks he has won the next generation, but he has only succeeded in making them so miserable that they are finally ready for me. In 2026, I am going to pour out my spirit on the young ones in a way that will baffle the old and the wise. They will not be interested in the dead religion of their fathers or the angry politics of their mothers. They will want me, and they will find me. I saw a vision of a massive wall that had been built between people. It was a wall made of political slogans, old hurts, and clashing opinions. It looked like it was miles high and impossible to climb. But as the shaking of 2026 intensified, I saw the ground beneath the wall start to liquefy. The wall didn't just fall, it sank into the earth. People who had been screaming at each other from opposite sides suddenly found themselves standing face to face with nothing between them. The shaking removes the barriers, Jesus explained. When everything you trust is falling apart, you stop caring about who your neighbor voted for. You only care if they have a hand to hold. In 2026, I am going to create a hunger for connection that politics cannot satisfy. I'm going to force a unity that comes from shared need instead of shared opinion. I saw the theater churches again. As the economy shook and the political world became more chaotic, these churches began to empty out. People realized that the light shows and the feel-good talks couldn't help them when their lives were falling apart. But the churches that were built on the rock, the ones where people actually knelt and prayed, the ones where the Bible was lived out instead of just read, those churches started to overflow. People were standing in the parking lots just to be near the presence of God. I am cleaning my house, Jesus said. I am sweeping out the money changers and the performers. In 2026, the church will either be a hospital for the broken or it will be nothing at all. There will be no room for the lukewarm. The fire of the shaking will either light you up or burn you out. He showed me a vision of a map of the world, not just America. I saw that the shaking in 2026 was starting in the United States, but it was spreading like ripples in a pond. Other nations were watching, some with fear and some with hidden glee, but soon the shaking reached them too. It was a global moment of reckoning. Human pride was being challenged on every continent. The world looks to America to see what is possible, Jesus told me. And for too long, they have seen an idol of greed and self-will. But through the shaking of 2026, I'm going to show them a different possibility. I'm going to show them a people who can lose everything and still have joy because they have me. That is the light that will draw the nations. I saw the man, Donald Trump, one more time in this part of the vision. He was standing on a stage, but the lights were dimming. He looked out at the crowd, and for the first time, he didn't have a clever word or a bold promise. He just looked out at the people with a sense of shared humanity. In 2026, even those who have been used as tools of the shaking will have to face their own soul, Jesus whispered. No one is exempt. No one is too high or too low. Every knee will bow, James. Some will bow in love, and some will bow because they have no strength left to stand. But everyone will know that I am Lord. The intensity of the vision was so much that I felt like I was being pulled apart. The colors, the sounds, the emotions of millions of people all hitting me at once. But Jesus held my hand firm, and his peace was like an anchor. Tell them not to look for a political solution to a spiritual problem, he commanded. Tell them that 2026 is the year where the heart of the nation is weighed. Tell them to stop being afraid of the shaking and start being afraid of staying the same. I am coming to bring life, but first, the dead things must be buried. I saw a vision of a great river. On one side was a desert, dry and cracked, filled with the ghosts of political arguments and old trophies. On the other side was a lush green forest, vibrating with life and light. The year 2026 was the bridge between the two. Many are trying to build a city in the desert, Jesus said. They are trying to irrigate the sand with their own efforts. But the river is rising. In 2026, the flood will come and wash away the desert cities. Only those who have crossed the bridge will find the water that never runs dry. The sea of glass began to ripple, and I saw a vision of the high summer of 2026. The heat was shimmering off the pavement of every highway in the country, but the heat wasn't just coming from the sun. I saw a vision of July 4, 2026, and the celebrations looked different than they ever had before. In some places, the fireworks were launched into a sky that was still thick with that gray, suffocating fog, and the explosions of light seemed small and dim against the darkness. But in other places, in small towns, in inner city parks, and in suburban backyards, I saw people gathering not to celebrate their own strength or their own history, but to fall on their faces before God. In those places, the golden light was so bright it made the fireworks look like flickering candles. I saw people burning their political banners in small bonfires, not out of hatred for their country, but because they realized those banners had become veils that kept them from seeing the face of Christ. I saw men who had spent their whole lives arguing about the Constitution suddenly weeping as they read the Beatitudes. They were realizing that their true independence wasn't from a king or a government, but from the power of sin and the weight of their own pride. The shaking of 2026 is the year of the great unmasking, Jesus said, and his voice seemed to vibrate through the very glass we were standing on. I am stripping away the costumes. I am taking away the scripts. I am allowing the world to see what happens when human wisdom reaches its limit. The man, Donald Trump, will be at the center of a storm that no one can control. He will be a sign to the world that the time of trusting in chariots and horses is over. I am calling my people to look at the scales. As he spoke, a massive set of scales appeared in the sky, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. These weren't scales for weighing gold or silver, and they weren't for counting votes. They were scales for weighing the human heart. I saw the hearts of millions of Americans being placed on those scales. On one side was the weight of their political loyalty, their anger, and their desire for earthly winning. On the other side was the weight of their love, their humility, and their surrender to me. In many cases, the scales tipped violently toward the side of the world. But as the shaking of 2026 intensified, as the economy faltered in the vision of April 15, 2026, and as the political systems began to grind to a halt, I saw people desperately grabbing things from the world side of the scale and throwing them away. They were tossing out their bitterness. They were throwing away their need to be right. They were discarding their idols of power, and as they did, the scales began to balance. "I am not looking for a majority, James," Jesus whispered, his breath like a cool wind on my face. "I am looking for a remnant. I am looking for those who will stand in the gap." The shaking is meant to produce a people who are unshakable because they have nothing left to lose but me. When a man has lost his bank account, his political party, and his reputation, he is finally free to be used by the Spirit. I saw a vision of a great spiritual army rising up. They didn't have weapons and they didn't have uniforms. They were mothers holding their children and praying. They were old men like me, standing in their gardens and interceding for their neighborhoods. They were factory workers who stopped their machines to speak a word of peace to a coworker. This army was moving through the gray fog, and wherever they went, the shadows fled. The dark, jagged spirits couldn't stand the frequency of their praise. I saw the mirror of Donald Trump one last time. In the vision, he was standing before a great mirror that reflected not his face, but the soul of the people who were looking at him. I saw that his role in the shaking was to force every person to confront their own reflection. If you saw a savior in him, you were confronted with your lack of trust in God. If you saw a demon in him, you were confronted with the hatred in your own heart. He was the instrument of the Lord to bring the hidden things into the light. The year 2026 will be remembered as the time when the silence of God ended, Jesus said. For a long time, I have been quiet while the noise of the world grew louder. But in the shaking, I am speaking through the circumstances, through the failures of man, and through the hunger of the soul. The question is not what will happen to the country. The question is what will happen to you. The sea of glass began to dissolve into a brilliant, blinding whiteness. The weight of the vision was beginning to pull at me, and I knew my time in this realm was coming to an end. I looked at Jesus, and for a moment, I saw the reflection of the whole universe in his eyes. I saw every star, every atom, and every tear that had ever been shed. "Go back, James," he said. His voice was no longer a thunderous roar or a gentle whisper. It was a command that moved the very fabric of my being. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them that the shadows are real, but the light is greater. Tell them that 2026 is not a year of political victory or defeat, but a year of spiritual destiny. Tell them to stop building their lives on the sand of human leaders and start building on the rock of my word. Tell them, I am coming for a bride that is awake, not a crowd that is arguing. I reached out to touch his hand, but the golden light began to swirl around me like a whirlwind. I felt a sudden, sharp tug in the center of my chest, like a silver cord being pulled taut. The peace of that place began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness of the world I had left behind. I saw a quick flash of the year that had started on January 1st, 2026, and I realized that every day of this year was a precious gift, an opportunity for people to turn back before the shaking reached its peak. "Do not be afraid, James," his voice echoed, growing fainter as I felt myself falling back toward the earth. "I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The shaking is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of the awakening." Then, the brilliance was gone. I spent 5 days in the hospital. The doctors called it a miracle. They said a man my age shouldn't have come back after being down that long without brain damage. But I'm sharper now than I've ever been. I see the world differently. I look at my garden, at my flag, and at my wife, and I realize how thin the line is between here and there. Today is February 17, 2026. I've been home for a few days and I can't keep quiet. This isn't about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's about being awake. Jesus showed me that we are in a window of time that is closing fast. Donald Trump is just a signpost. The real story of 2026 is whether or not we will let go of our pride and our political idols and return to the living God. The shaking is here. You can feel it in the air, you can see it in the news, and you can sense it in your own heart. Everything that can be shaken will be. Don't put your trust in a person. Don't put your trust in a party. Put your trust in the one who holds eternity in his hands. I was a traditional man who thought I was safe because I was good. I was wrong. We aren't called to be good. We are called to be his. Wake up. Wake up. The year is 2026, and the Lord is calling his people home. Don't wait until your heart stops in a garden to realize what actually matters. Time is running out, but his arms are still open. Choose him today.